use that to go ahead and segue on to insurance, and specifically to the two type of policies that business owners, I think, should be aware of, what are known as business owner policies, BOP policies, and CGL policies, which are commercial general liability policies. They're both largely the same. Minor differences between the two. I really won't bother going into too much of them. But know that generally speaking, what these types of policies provide are liability insurance to businesses. Okay? So in the scenario that I gave you, the tide on the floor in the aisle, even in the mechanic's shop, the tire flying over into the mechanic's yard, if a business is sued, if a claim is made against a business for the business's negligence, those are the kind of scenarios where liability insurance will provide coverage to the business. Okay? And will pay those damages. Did you have a question? Oh, okay. They also provide coverage for things like property damage, theft, vandalism, fire, things like that. In addition, of course, to negligence. There will not be coverage for intentional acts. Using the Vegas shooting as an example. If that was a Mandalay Bay employee who set up in that corner suite and shot into that concert, that is an intentional act that the business would not be liable for. Okay? Liability policies cover negligence, theft, property damage, things like that. Intentional acts are excluded. Now, again, using your example with the Vegas shooter, perhaps a difference, though, might be, let's say again it was an employee, a Mandalay Bay employee, who was the shooter. The inevitable question that would be at the subject of the lawsuit is as your employer, were you on notice of this employee's dangerous propensities, any history of mental instability, any history of violence, suspicious behavior, all those kinds of things? If the employer is found to be on notice of the fact that an employee has dangerous propensities, a pattern of unstable or violent behavior, any of those kinds of things, that can create liability for the employer. And thus the employer negligently kept hired a employee with terribly dangerous propensities. That is how Mandalay Bay could potentially be negligent. Of course, in the real world, we know that's not the case. He was not a Mandalay Bay employee. Okay, but just again, kind of using that as an example.
But the liability insurance would not apply here because it was an intentional act. Even though they had negligence, it was negligence for hiring somebody who was unstable. It was still an intentional act.
I would say that no. I would say that would create liability on the part of the employer.
Okay.
Because then it's not the intentional act; it's the employer's negligence in hiring and keeping hired and allowing exposure to the public of an individual with dangerous propensities.
So if there was an employer or an employee and they had just fired him that day.
Oh, and this happens.
Sure. When does that liability cease? Upon firing, or
So this is why businesses who terminate employees are counseled to have the employee removed from the premises, to walk the employee off the premises, to notify security, to immediately disable access cards, to immediately change key codes, to do all those things to prevent a now former employee from having any access to the business. Now, that all sounds lovely, doesn't it? Okay. We know the sad reality is that even if an employer takes a lot of those steps, an employee can still come back and do something. You know, you have a mom and pop business with 2 or 3 employees, they don't have security guards or key cards, you know, or don't have the ability to change locks or access code. You know, these kind of things aren't at the disposal of a small business. So, I do think that a business has a responsibility to take proactive measures to protect their employees when they are terminating an employee, especially one who's known to have violent potential propensities. But yeah, it's tough.
So I guess my question would be, I own the insurance policy as the employer.
Mm-hmm.
It was my negligence in not dealing with the employee's problems
Was your negligence in continuing to?
and continuing
To
to
employ.
keep them employed.
Yeah.
They committed the intentional act. I am then sued for negligence. Does my insurance pay?
Yes.
Okay. Even if the insurance could prove that I was responsible in a
If-
way that's, I could have,
If, I know this sounds like mental
Comparatively.
gymnastics.
yeah.
And almost a little backwards, but if the claim is that you were aware of that employee's dangerous propensities and you continue to employ that, then that's a negligent hiring kind of scenario, and you are liable for that. If it is a scenario where the guy just simply goes off the deep end, no coverage.
I get that as an employer, I'm liable,
Right,
but my insurance company is required to pay. Even if I put an unreasonable risk.
yes.
You know, there's exclusions for insurance. If I do certain things, they're
Right.
not gonna cover me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This will be what is known as a declaratory judgment action.
Uh-huh.
To see if the insurance company would have to provide coverage in that kind of scenario.
Okay.
That would be my best guess,
Okay.
yes. Because there's all kinds of issues raised.
Right.
Did I have notice of dangerous propensities? Did you do a background check? What, you know,
Yeah, I mean, because
Yeah.
the insurance company's not gonna wanna pay either, so
Of course
they're gonna
not.
do whatever they can to not.
right,
Right.
right, absolutely. A deck action, that's what I smell coming. Declaratory judgment action, which would be a legal action to see if the insurance company is required to provide coverage in that scenario. Any other questions about that? Yes, ma'am.
There are 2 types of insurance policies. One was BOP, and what was the other?
CGL, which is commercial general liability, largely the same, yeah. Okay. So insurance only pays out to the limits of the insurance policy, okay? You buy a $500,000 policy, $500,000 liability policy. There's a $1 million verdict rendered against you. What happens?
You owe $500,000.
You owe $500,000. Okay? Again, it's a little bit of a game of Russian roulette of figuring out, as a business owner, how much insurance do I really need? You can have your pants scared off of you pretty easily to think of the absolute worst case scenario, you know, of a $30 million, the potential of some $30 million judgment. Realistically, for most small businesses have to make a very careful business decision about how much insurance do you need versus how much insurance can you afford. Okay? No magic number there. But that's ultimately the question that a business, and it's going to depend on the kind of business, okay? You know, I mean, if you are running a landscaping company with dangerous equipment, you're in a construction, you know, you're a construction company, you're a daycare where you've got exposure to small children, you know, those kind of businesses probably need to take some action to get really good, healthy liability policies. If your business is, I don't know, I can think of risk in any business imaginable, so I'm probably not the best person to.
Uber.
Oh, that's so risky. That's actually a whole different deal with auto insurance policies and actually who kind of covers those types of things. Okay.
What about like an operator, a phone operator?
Let's say you're an at-home telemarketer, right?
Sure.
We're gonna assume that you're not subject to FCC fines. Low risk, my point is, low risk businesses that don't have a tremendous amount of exposure to the public, don't have a great propensity for, negligent physical harm to others, don't have to have usually big insurance policies. Okay, but again, business by business determination.
So I have a question. So in the book, in the libel part and slander, employees not giving out information, or employers not giving out information on employees. And if somebody was to do something and they did that at the other place, that company could be held liable. But all the time, at least where I work, and this happens no matter what field, in the medical field, if you mess up, they go, look, just leave. Nobody gets fired because I guess they don't want to pay unemployment insurance. And they can't really say anything about why they left. So now you have, this happens all the time.
Sure.
People run around who I feel are kind of dangerous out there, yet I've never heard of anybody, and you can go into the state and the Department
Yeah.
of Professional Regulation and look up all these people, physicians with multiple issues. How come you never hear about places getting sued for that?
So that is actually the subject. I was actually reading an article about this on today. This is a hot issue right now in the Florida legislature. There's a bill pending, I believe, that is trying to open up access to incident reports filed against physicians and medical care providers so that there's more open access to those records. I don't know a lot of the details about it. I know it's a very hotly contested bill. I'm sure if you could Google it and find out more information. I literally scanned it over for 20 seconds. But I do know that it's a hotly contested issue. But I don't think it's even just the medical profession.
Oh, no, it's,
though.
yeah.
Right.
What I can talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. But you've got it's common, I think, in a lot of professions. Okay, you didn't do a great job. What you did wasn't illegal, but we're quietly going to part ways, and it can't be disclosed to subsequent potential employers. So, but yeah, Google that article on that bill that's coming through right now, because that I do think talks about the very issue that you're talking about. Medical malpractice plaintiffs' attorneys feel that kind of information should be accessible to the public. Okay, any other questions on that? Some good questions tonight, guys. Okay, we'll move on to litigation process. Let me ask you, what did y'all think about the Buffalo Creek book?
I like that guy. He was a good guy.
The plaintiff's attorney, yeah.
Yeah.
It was sad how aggressively the Pittsman fought back, just tried every wormy way to get
Well,
out of it.
he had a little bit of luck, but he.
And it was his side of the story too.
True.
But
Yeah.
just like Greg Smith had his side of the story. But yes, absolutely, yes.
Well, it just seemed like he went the extra mile into figuring out, different things about the company, looking at other mines they may have had in here and other things, and a lot of behind the scenes work.
And that is exactly why I assigned the book for you to read, because that book, in my mind, describes in a real life scenario how discovery actually works better than any textbook that I could possibly ever assign you.
You'd see why it gets so expensive. Wow.
Bingo. Absolutely. Absolutely. I may have said this in the last class. I know the book is old. I apologize for that. But I literally have never found a book that explains it as well or in such an interesting way as this one. So I've kind of just gotten over the fact that it's 40 years old, and hope my students will too. Because I think it's still relevant, even though it's an older book. The only distinctions that I would make is, you have to probably take the numbers and times them by about 8 or 10 to adjust for inflation when we're talking about what numbers they were actually dealing with. Beyond that, I'd say the only difference really with discovery is the fact that it's not a banker boxes in the back of a semi-tractor trailer that's being delivered from New York, but a zip drive,
I actually found
thumb drive, that has probably that same exact number of documents on it.
I had found a calculator, an inflation
Oh,
calculator
okay.
online.
Yeah.
It said the verdict, that 13.5 that was awarded is
Right.
worth $77 million
Oh, wow.
today.
Oh, as a verdict
Yeah,
calculator,
yes.
not just an inflation calculator.
Yes, right. So it would have been worth 77 million.
Yeah,
Seems low.
yeah, that's interesting.
That's,
Well, and what is interesting about that too is that that kind of goes to show you, you know, it's not a pure inflationary analysis. What that has gone to show you is how the culture and dynamics of litigation and how our culture, how our society responds to litigation, responds to providing compensation to victims in those kinds of scenarios. An exponential increase in what kinds of awards juries will, and the amount of money, I should say, juries are willing to award now in the face of corporate malfeasance.
They know how much these companies make off of it, so.
I'm sorry?
They know how much these companies make.
There's less tolerance for it too.
Right,
It's just.
more information, thanks to the discovery process, less social tolerance, more of a sense of, you know, there's a difference between punitive damages, I think this was covered in the book, and compensatory damages. You know, they didn't get into punitive damages, but in my practice experience, I do think that there's a certain level of a punitive mindset when jurors are awarding even compensatory damages for pain and suffering. Because when a jury is asked to award pain and suffering, sky's the limit. I mean, you know, when it comes to economic damages, there's a very specific amount that they'll be asked to award. Medicals, future medicals, past lost wages, future lost wages. Those numbers are relatively easy to calculate. They're pretty black and white. I mean, you can fuss over a couple of years of a life expectancy here, levels of education here, and, you know, averages, compensation averages is kind of. At the end of the day, you know, there's not that much range usually on compensatory damages. Non-compensatory damages, those are, I should say, non-economic damages, like pain and suffering, like emotional distress, like loss of consortium, those kinds of things. There's no way to calculate that. None at all. And a lot of it will come down to how appealing is that witness. I can't tell you how many depositions I went into, meeting the plaintiff for the first time. And I put in a call. Oh, she's going to be good on the stand. And my call to my client saying, she's going to be good on the stand, means you better rethink about how much you're going to pay to settle this case. Because this woman is appealing, and she's smart, and she speaks well, and a jury is going to fall in love with her and award her a lot of money. On the other side of this, I've gone into depositions and seen somebody who makes a terrible appearance, who's been in and out of jail 5 or 6 times, you know, who's scatterbrained, can't get their story straight, seems to be exaggerating, you know, and then you kind of think, I don't know how that person's going to play. Jury might not like that kind of behavior or that demeanor, and might not be willing to you know, award that person a whole lot if they're not a sympathetic witness. So, again, you know, the wide variability that all these dynamics have. Okay, what kicks off the party that is known as litigation? What is the starting point? A complaint, precisely. I'll just kind of go through this quickly. You know, all this stuff is in the slides, but a complaint is going to have, the document is going to have, it's going to name the parties.